All right, buckle up, everyone. Today's deep dive, the world of Islam.
We're talking a sweeping history, talking about its different branches and how those differences, they still impact global politics today, even now.
Think of it like a crash course, but with, all the juicy details, the kind that make history come alive.
It really is like stepping back in time, but we're not just observing. We're making
Ah,
those connections to understand how those past events still influence us today. It's incredible.
exactly. We'll go from the markets of Mecca to the heart of empires, really uncovering the stories behind a faith, followed by, what, over 1 billion people today? It's a lot.
And the best part is, this isn't about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the ideas, the clashes, the cultures that have just resonated through the centuries.
Okay, so let's rewind to 7th century Arabia. Picture it. Bustling trade routes, tribal societies, a real melting pot of beliefs.
Arabia was this vibrant crossroads. It wasn't just about trade, although that was huge. Mecca, for example, it was a central trading hub. Caravans, spices, silks, you name it.
It was the place to be, sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. But Mecca was also a major religious center. We're
Yeah.
talking about the Kaaba, that cube-shaped shrine. This was a world of polytheism, many gods, many tribal alliances, and let's be honest, many conflicts too.
It sounds like the setup for, well, something big to happen. And that's where the story of Islam starts, right? With a man named Muhammad. What do we know about his early life?
Okay, so picture this. Young Muhammad born into a prominent Meccan family. But he's also deeply troubled by the social injustices he sees, by the spiritual emptiness around him. He spends a lot of time in the mountains, away from the city, contemplating, searching.
And this is where he has those pivotal revelations.
Precisely. Around the year 610 AD, tradition says Muhammad received his first revelation from God through the angel Gabriel while he was meditating in a cave near Mecca. These revelations, considered the literal word of God, became the verses of the Quran, Islam's holy book.
So what was the message? What did these revelations say?
They were radical, really.
Mhm.
Muhammad's revelations challenged the status quo, everything. He preached against worshiping idols, a direct challenge to the Meccan way of life. He emphasized one God, Allah, and he advocated for social justice, equality, caring for the poor, for the vulnerable. It was a huge deal.
It's a powerful message. I can see how that would appeal to people, especially those who felt marginalized.
Absolutely. And while it did attract many followers, those seeking change, spiritual guidance, it really threatened the Meccan elite. I mean, their power was directly tied to the old ways.
Challenging the powerful rarely goes smoothly. How did they react to Muhammad and his followers?
Let's just say it caused some friction. Persecution started ramping up, forcing them to flee Mecca in 622 AD. That journey, we know it as the Hijra. It marks the start of the Islamic calendar, year one for Islam.
Wow. It's humbling to think that such a momentous event, the start of a global religion, came from something as uncertain as escape, as running for your life. Where did they go? Where did they find safety?
They found refuge in Medina, a city a few hundred miles north of Mecca. And that right there, that was a turning point. In Medina, Muhammad's role expanded. He went from prophet to a political and military leader. He established the first Muslim community called the Ummah.
A community forged in exile. I can only imagine the challenges they faced.
Oh, without a doubt. Threats from Mecca, internal divisions, just the sheer task of building a society based on these new Islamic principles. Life in Medina, it was anything but simple.
It sounds like a pressure cooker of a situation. Did Muhammad ever return to Mecca?
He did, but not as a fugitive. In 630 AD, after years of conflict, he and his followers returned to Mecca in a stunning victory.
So what happened after years of being persecuted? I have to ask, did they retaliate?
This is what I love about history. You expect one thing, well, Muhammad declared a general amnesty. He forgave his former enemies.
Wow. That's an incredible act of forgiveness, especially after all those years of conflict.
That's powerful. He then cleansed the Kaaba of idols, rededicating it to Allah. Within a few years, most of the Arabian Peninsula unified under Islam.
So Muhammad dies in 632 AD. Islam is thriving. But who takes the reins? Who leads this new, rapidly growing community?
That's where we get the Rashidun Caliphate, the first four leaders after Muhammad. They had this enormous responsibility guiding a community that had exploded in size. Imagine the pressure.
Talk about inheriting a whirlwind. So how'd they do? Did they keep the momentum going?
What they achieved in such a short time is amazing. They solidified the Muslim community, established Islamic law, and they expanded the caliphate at an unbelievable pace.
Okay, stop. How much are we talking here? How big did it get?
In just a few decades, we're talking an empire stretching from Persia in the east all the way to the Byzantine Empire, that's the eastern half of the Roman Empire, for those keeping track at home, and even into North Africa in the west. It was massive.
From the deserts of Arabia to the heart of some of the most powerful empires at the time. That's not just good PR. What fueled that kind of expansion?
It's a perfect storm, really. You have the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, both already weakened from fighting each other for years, vulnerable.
Ripe for the picking, almost.
It's about being in the right place at the right time, for sure. But you also can't discount the power of belief. These early Muslim armies were incredibly driven. They believed in their cause. And let's be real, the promise of conquest and riches didn't hurt either.
It's a potent mix, but conquering is one thing. Ruling such a diverse empire is another. How did they handle it? Did they force their beliefs on everyone?
This is where it gets interesting. While they implemented Islamic law, their governance was actually quite practical. Think about it. Conquered people, they were mostly allowed to practice their own religions. Sure, there were restrictions, extra taxes, but this level of tolerance, it was unusual for the time.
Military strength, savvy leadership, and a surprisingly tolerant approach to governing a diverse population. They had it all. So what went wrong? There had to be some bumps in the road. What about this internal conflict we teased earlier, this family feud?
Ah, yes, the Sunni-Shia split. It's a turning point in Islamic history, one that still resonates strongly today. You see, after the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate took over. They ruled from Damascus. And this shift in power really inflamed some underlying tensions. And that's when things boiled over.
Okay, so who are the Sunni and Shia Muslims? What's the root of this centuries-long rift?
It all comes down to leadership. After the Prophet Muhammad died, there was a question of who should lead the Muslim community, who was the rightful successor. And there were two main schools of thought on that. The Sunni, they're the majority of Muslims today, they believe the caliph, the leader, should be chosen by the community. It was about merit, piety, their ability to lead.
So kind of like electing the best person for the job based on their qualifications, not just who their father was.
Exactly. It emphasizes consensus and tradition. They believe Muhammad didn't name a specific successor. But the Shia, they thought things differently. They believe leadership should have stayed within the Prophet's family.
So who did they believe should have been the leader?
Ali. He was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. The Shia believed Ali was the rightful heir and that leadership should have passed down through his descendants. They believed those descendants were divinely appointed.
Okay, so two different takes on who should be in charge. And we all know how well disagreements over power tend to go, even in the best of families. How did this difference of opinion play out?
Well, you can imagine. You've got this new empire expanding incredibly fast, figuring out its identity, and then this question of leadership arises. It caused some serious turmoil, wars, power struggles. It all culminated in the death of Ali and his son Hussein. It's an event still deeply mourned by Shia Muslims today.
That's incredibly sad. So how did this split change the Islamic world? Did it just divide neatly into Sunni and Shia?
It's not quite as simple as drawing a line in the sand. The Umayyad Caliphate, they are mostly Sunni. They were eventually overthrown by the Abbasids in 750 AD. But that Sunni-Shia split, it continued to shape everything, the politics, the religion, everything for centuries to come.
So not just a long-ago disagreement then. This division still has an impact today.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back to those Abbasids for a minute. They came to power, and that ushered in what many call the Golden Age of Islam.
The Golden Age. That sounds promising. What made it so special? Were they just conquering, or was there something more?
They did expand the empire, for sure, but they were about much more than just military power. Under the Abbasids, especially during the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, their capital city, Baghdad, well, it became the global center of knowledge. It was incredible.
This is that Baghdad we always hear about, right?
Yeah.
The city of 1,001 nights, the scholars, the libraries.
Exactly. Think bustling marketplaces, magnificent mosques, libraries overflowing with scrolls from every corner of the known world. The Abbasids, they were different. They actively encouraged learning. They supported scholars from everywhere. Persians, Indians, Greeks, Christians, Jews, everybody came together. It was a truly cosmopolitan center of learning.
So what were the big achievements? Give us the highlights reel.
Imagine ancient Greek texts being translated, new mathematical concepts like algebra being born, the first hospitals being built. This wasn't just a golden age for the Islamic world. It was a golden age for knowledge itself.
It sounds incredible. I'm already looking up flights to Baghdad. But if it was so prosperous, so innovative, what happened? Empires don't just disappear overnight. Why did it decline?
Like anything, things change. Internal power struggles, economic troubles, all those things take their toll. By the 10th century, you see these regional powers, they start flexing their muscles, vying for control.
It's giving Game of Thrones, everyone wanting a piece of the pie. So who are the major players? Who stepped into the ring?
One of the biggest groups were the Seljuk Turks. They were nomadic from Central Asia, and they converted to Islam. Over time, they gained control over big chunks of the caliphate, further weakening the Abbasids.
And this is around the time of the Crusades, right? Europe's attempt to, let's call it, reclaim the Holy Land.
You've got it. The Crusades, they just added another layer of chaos to an already turbulent region. They didn't push the Muslims out of the Holy Land, but they did accelerate the fragmentation of the Muslim world. It was a tense time, with relations between religious groups becoming even more strained.
So we've got crumbling empires, new powers rising, the Crusades adding fuel to the fire. It sounds like the 11th and 12th centuries were, well, interesting times in the Middle East.
Interesting, might be putting it mildly. And if you think that was intense, just wait till we get to the Mongols in part 2. Talk about a game changer.
The Mongols, huh? Talk about shaking things up. I mean, they weren't exactly known for their gentle touch, so things in the Islamic world, they couldn't really get much worse after that, could they?
It certainly felt apocalyptic at the time. But history is full of surprises, right? Even in the face of that level of destruction, new powers, new ideas, they always find a way to emerge. The Mongols, as much damage as they inflicted, they actually cleared the path for a new chapter in Islamic history.
Out of the ashes, huh? So who are the major players that rose to power during this time of upheaval?
One word: Ottomans.
Okay, the Ottomans. Refresh my memory.
So picture this, a Turkish tribe. They start expanding their influence, slowly at first, from a tiny little piece of Anatolia. And eventually, they become one of the biggest, longest-lasting empires the world has ever seen.
The Ottomans, they were the ones who finally conquered Constantinople, right? That was a big deal.
That's them. 1453, Sultan Mehmed II leads them to victory, capturing Constantinople. It was a turning point. I mean, they didn't just win a battle, they ended the Byzantine Empire. It was the start of Ottoman dominance, really.
I'm trying to picture it, the fall of Constantinople, such a legendary city. What happened after they conquered it?
They made it their own. They renamed it Istanbul and turned it into this magnificent capital city. Under their rule, the city flourished. It became this incredible mix of Byzantine and Islamic traditions. Art, culture, trade, you name it, Istanbul had it.
And it wasn't just Constantinople, right? The Ottomans, they had a pretty impressive empire, didn't they?
Oh, they were ambitious, that's for sure. At their peak, their territory was massive. Think Southeastern Europe, Western Asia, North Africa, even parts of the Caucasus. A true empire. They spanned 3 continents. They were a force to be reckoned with, controlling trade, playing the political game on a global scale. And they did it for centuries.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've covered the rise of Islam, we've talked about the fall of empires and the rise of new ones, but this whole time, that Sunni-Shia split, it's still there, right? It's got to be impacting things. How did that play out, especially with the Ottomans coming to power?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do religion and politics mix? Well, the Ottomans, they were Sunni Muslims, and their rise. It had a huge impact on that whole Sunni-Shia dynamic.
So how did they handle that relationship? Because it's not always easy. Did they pick a side?
Let's just say they weren't exactly Switzerland. The Ottomans, they saw themselves as protectors of Sunni Islam, which, as you can imagine, put them at odds with the Safavid Empire.
Hold up. Safavids. Who were they?
Oh, right. Around the same time the Ottomans were rising in the west, you had the Safavids emerging in Persia, in the east. And they were Shia Muslims, totally dedicated to it. So now you've got 2 powerful empires, each one backing a different branch of Islam, both wanting to be top dog.
So it's the Sunni-Shia split rematch, round 2. But this time, the empires are even bigger.
It's more than a rematch, it's a rivalry for the ages. And the Ottoman-Safavid conflict, it wasn't just about religion, of course. They wanted it all land, control of trade, influence. But that religious difference, it added a whole other level of tension to the mix.
Give me an example. What were some of the big conflicts between them?
Oh, we're talking battles, sieges, enough intrigue and drama for a TV show. One of the most famous showdowns was the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. A true clash of titans. Ottomans with their muskets and cannons, Safavids with their cavalry. It was a clash of military might and ideologies.
Who won?
The Ottomans. Their firepower was too much for the Safavids. That victory cemented their hold on eastern Anatolia, but it also drove a deeper wedge between the Sunni and Shia worlds.
It's a good reminder that history, it's not all about ideas and philosophies. Sometimes it's about battles and empires and ambition.
It's about all of that. But it's also about the power of belief, how it can unite people, divide people, how those divisions can last for centuries. The Ottomans and the Safavids, they're a perfect example of that. Faith, politics, and the hunger for power.
So this period, it really sets the stage for the Middle East we know today. But how exactly do we get from there to here? What about the fall of the Ottomans and the Safavids? How did these huge empires just disappear?
That's where things get really interesting. Because while both empires are long gone, their rivalry, those tensions between Sunni and Shia Islam, they're still shaping the region today.
Okay.
But first, let's talk about what caused those empires to crumble. It's a story of internal struggles, external pressures, and the tides of history turning.
So empires crumbling, it's almost like a lot of history, isn't it? They rise, they shine, and then eventually they fade away. What happened?
It's rarely one thing, you know. It's usually this complex mix of internal problems, external pressures. You're ruling a vast territory, different people, different beliefs, and it takes a toll. Add economic troubles, maybe a military defeat or two, and even the mightiest empire starts to crack.
Death by 1,000 cuts. So what were some of the specifics for the Ottomans?
Well, by the 19th century, they were being challenged on all sides. You had these rising European powers all wanting a piece of the pie. Then you had internal rebellions, people within the empire demanding change. And to top it all off, a series of expensive wars. They were stretched thin, resources depleted, their hold on power weakening. They weren't the mighty Ottomans of old anymore.
From rulers of a vast empire to the sick man of Europe, as they were called. That's a tough fall from grace. What about the Safavids? Did they face a similar fate?
The Safavids, they had their own set of problems. Internal conflicts, economic struggles, and their neighbors, well, let's just say they weren't exactly the friendly type. It all culminated with those Afghan invaders in the 18th century, and that was pretty much it for the Safavid Empire.
Gone, just like that. So
Yeah.
what happens when empires collapse? Someone else usually steps in to fill the void, right?
Right, and in the case of the Middle East, it was the European powers who saw an opportunity. With the Ottomans and the Safavids out of the picture, they swooped in, eager to expand their colonial empires. They redrew the map, established new borders, basically shaping the region to fit their interest.
It's amazing how often that happens in history. One empire falls, another one is ready to take its place. But we can't forget about that Sunni-Shia divide, can we? It's been there all along, simmering beneath the surface. How did it play into this new era?
It continued to be a major factor, shaping alliances, driving conflicts, really impacting how the entire region evolved. Think about it, you have these new nations being formed, often with borders that made no sense, drawn by people who didn't understand the local dynamics. In all that chaos, religion became even more important, a source of identity and solidarity.
Right, because when everything else feels uncertain, people often turn to religion for stability, for a sense of belonging.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the big one, the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's a major force in the Middle East today, and to understand it, we need to look back at everything we've talked about today.
Okay, so lay it out for us. Saudi Arabia, Iran, what's the source of their rivalry, and how does it tie back to that centuries-old tension between Sunni and Shia Islam?
It's a classic power struggle, really. Two powerful nations, each claiming to be the leader of the Muslim world, each one representing a different branch of Islam. Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, home to Mecca and Medina, they see themselves as the leaders of the Sunni world. And Iran, ever since their revolution in 1979, they've positioned themselves as the champions of Shia Islam, challenging Western influence at every turn.
And it's more than just words, right? It's proxy wars, it's political maneuvering, it's serious stuff.
It's about control, influence, who gets to shape the region and its future. Both countries have supported different groups in conflicts across the Middle East. Yemen, Syria. It's a recipe for instability.
It's incredible, isn't it, how something that happened centuries ago, those old divisions, can still have such a powerful impact on the world today.
It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and names in a textbook. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world, the echoes of the past that we still feel today.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the origins of Islam, the rise and fall of empires, that constant tension between Sunni and Shia, all the way to the complex realities of the Middle East today. It's a lot to process.
It really is. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore: the art, the architecture, the philosophy, and the story. It's still being written.
Exactly. So to our listeners, what sparked your curiosity today? What are you going to explore next? The history of Islam, it's full of surprises.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, to look beyond the headlines. And remember, history is more than just the past. It's a guide to understanding the present and, hopefully, building a better future.